Hello and welcome to the Teach-In Network teach-in on non-cooperation with Trump. We have a bunch of great speakers for you tonight, included Avi Chomsky, Norman Solomon, Alex and Kira from the Climate Defense Project, Buffalo's India Walton, researcher Simone Chun, and ZNet's Alexandria Shaner, who helped us organize this teach-in. So big thank you to Alexandria and the ZNet team. For the speakers, you do not have to have your camera on the whole time. So while you're not speaking, feel free if you want to turn it off and relax. It's totally up to you, no pressure either way. If you have not already checked out teachinnetwork.org, I urge you to do so. A link is in the chat now. And if you're able to leave a donation for us, that helps out a ton. So we always encourage you to do that. But we'll talk more about that and more about Teach-In Network later, and a little more about the ZNet later. Right now, we can go ahead and get started with our first speaker. Norman Solomon. He'll be speaking about what to demand from electeds and how to demand it. He's the co-founder, national director of RootsAction.org, and executive director and founder of the Institute for Public Accuracy. He is the author of a dozen books, including War Made Easy and most recently, War Made Invisible. Thank you so much, Norman, and go ahead and take it away.
Well, thanks to everybody making this event possible. We know that organizing is crucial. We know that we're now in a concentric series of crises from local areas to nationwide to global. And organizing and activism, of course, will be key. Nothing will be handed down to us. We can't depend on elected officials. We're going to have to do it ourselves to build movements. That's the history of this country, and that's the history we will need to create. I'm going to talk about some aspects of how movements ought to, I believe, interface, interact, deal with elected officials. And to generalize with some blessed exceptions, I would say that we're too damn nice. We're too deferential, and we have not been assertive enough as movement organizations, even as constituents, as individuals. Quite often, there's a tendency to be so appreciative of the good things that a member of Congress does, for instance, that when there are terrible things done through voting, through rhetoric, and so forth, there's a tendency to just give her or him a pass. We have seen the consequences of that sort of approach. Right now, when we have whatever you want to call it, an autocratic, a neo-fascistic, an authoritarian president and regime in the executive branch, many, countless thousands of people who are constituents have gone to Democrats in Congress and they've said, for God's sake, wake up, do something. This is not a normal bipartisan inter-party struggle going on. This is a struggle for democracy. And a very common refrain coming back from the elected Democrats is, oh, don't talk to us. Talk to the Republicans in Congress. They're the problem. There are huge flaws in that response. It's basically politician talk for bug off, go away, stop bothering me. The reality is that not only half of the population of this country lives in a state with 2 Democratic senators, but a large majority of progressives, of Democrats, of those who are not right-wing, the vast majority of us live in states with 2 Democratic senators, and quite likely we're also represented by a Democratic House member. And so when any of them say, oh, we're not the problem, go talk to Republicans, it's a brush off that even in practical terms doesn't make any sense, because you're not able to send an email to a member of the House and Senate unless you're constituent. You'll be blocked otherwise. So that's one problem. If you call a member of Congress, the first thing that the staff person will want to ascertain is whether you're a constituent. And if you're not going to get anywhere at all. So I think that's a crucial, don't take no for an answer. It's a crucial way to insist this is a country in dire peril in terms of domestic policy and the world in terms of foreign policy. When we look at the foreign policy problems, they are huge, as we are aware, and we're going to hear about later tonight. And unfortunately, the Democratic Party has, I think, more than ever in recent years, fashioned itself as a war party. I'm not saying the war party because there are now two major war parties more clearly than ever. One of our action handles, you might say, is not only the traditional ways of calling and writing and sending faxes and emails and so forth, and petitioning for that matter, all good, which is the fact that large numbers of convenient congressional offices are located very near where we live. And I think it's hidden in plain sight. I mean, the federal government has conveniently provided to us well over 1,000 House district offices around the country. And unless we live in a rural area, we live pretty damn close to one or more of those district offices. And it's a real omission, I think, to consider how rarely there are picket lines up at district house offices, at home state offices of senators. It's right there. We can do it. It's amazing what a few people picketing consistently in front of an office will do, because after all, as flawed, to put it mildly, as this semi-democratic lowercase d system is, these folks are concerned about being reelected. And already next year is going to be obviously the midterm elections, a third of the Senate, all of the House up for reelection if they're going to run again. So I really would urge people to really mull over, how can we mobilize? It's not the be all and end all, but how can we mobilize to create tremendous visibility to pressure the members of Congress where we are ostensibly constituents who they are responsive to? And I'm not going to go through, I'm not even going to attempt to go through a litany of the problems that we're facing, the oligarchy, the environmental destruction, misogyny, the xenophobia, the militarism that is worse than ever. And when the Democrats in Congress tell us they're doing all they can, that's absolutely false. The senators in the minority can grind the Senate to a halt in many ways. The Democrats in the House are talking about a house on fire, literally and figuratively, in terms of the freedoms in this country that have remained, and yet they are speaking in modulated tones. If the building that you're in, if your home, if your workplace is on fire, you don't say, I think we have a problem. You yell and scream. You insist that there be a very immediate response to put out the fire. And yet we're not getting that kind of urgency from except a few members of Congress. And we have to insist that that's going to change. It's all about, of course, movement building. And it's all about, to return back to where I started, to not deferring to members of Congress or governors or elected officials as though there's some kind of royalty. It's become a truism and a slogan, the president is not a king, which is certainly the case. But often it's easy to lapse into treating a member of the House and Senate who we might encounter as some kind of royalty. That's completely wrong. It's a cliche, but it's true. They work for us. They're supposed to work for us. And at RootsAction.org, we've tried to be part of that movement building now for a dozen years. And along with going to teachinnetwork.org for the Teach-In Network, I do urge you, if you haven't already signed up, to go to RootsAction.org to get action bulletins. One aspect that you'll find on that website is something called DIY Roots Action. It's at the top. It's one of the top tabs. And you can create your own petition and you can target it for certain areas. And once you have accumulated the signers for whatever petition you create, then you have the capacity to message them ongoing. Hopefully hundreds or even thousands of people who respond to your petition, and then they can be getting your communications and you can organize with them on that basis. So I think that DIY Roots Action is a good resource. Finally, we ought to be primarying these members of Congress. It's not just about the general election. We've seen that we have many members of Congress, not enough, but many who are there because they were willing to primary incumbent Democrats. There's AOC. There's Ro Khanna. There's others who were told, no, you can't challenge that Democrat because they do something good. Ayanna Pressley is another of them. And they were told, don't try it. You're disrupting party unity. The Republicans are so bad. We've seen that the Democratic Party in Congress is just failing to rise to the moment. There are very few members of the House and Senate who have, and we need to insist that they do.
Thank you so much, Norman. We do have several questions for you we can try to get through really quick. First, just a quick shout out. Marjorie King says they did this morning, had a big rally at their Republican representative's office just this morning, and
Right.
several people from Raul Grijalva's district was there as well, who recently passed away. So I worked in Arizona for a while, and I love that they're really active there. So thank you, Marjorie. Another question. What else can we do besides sign a petition and donate? What do you think is the number one thing people could do right now, besides just sign a petition?
Well, I'd say there are a lot of number one things that people can do. Folks, of course, have a lot of different skills, interests, capacities, willingness, or comfort level. And we might think of it as a ladder. Start at a rung that you're comfortable with and try to climb it. No individual is going to change this. No few number of people, but a lot of individuals and few people working with a lot of other individuals and few people. That's where it's at. And I think that communities, wherever we are, is really crucial, because if we go to Washington, D.C., and we denounce members of Congress, for instance, that's good. But it's going to be way amplified if we do it where we live, if we do it through our local daily and weekly newspapers, to the extent we can get through those cracks in the walls, whatever independent media outlets exist in our areas, social media that can be targeted, and to organize, if possible, certainly neighborhood by neighborhood or even block by block, because we're building a long-term movement, and that's about relationships and building organizations.
Several years ago, RootsAction was a group that very early on led the charge to impeach Donald Trump. Should we be doing that again? Is now the time to impeach him, even though the Republicans are in control?
Well, if what should be done could be done, then that would be one of many actions on the list. As a practical matter, it's an okay or perhaps informative charge and aspiration to voice. As a practical matter, it's just not going anywhere right now. It should, but you look at the people in the House and Senate and majority, for now, no way.
What should we do about Schumer? This last question. What should we do about Schumer?
Well, Schumer is a symptom of a majority of the Democratic Party in Congress who are by an old playbook. Folks may have read the interview that the New York Times published with him last weekend, and it's really horrendous. When you look at what he's saying about Israel, he's claiming that there is not genocide going on in Gaza, whereas Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch issued definitive reports last December. He claimed to know what genocide is. He doesn't, if you just read the text of the Genocide Convention. And it's good that he's being challenged for basically caving in to the Trumpist party, but he should also be taken to task for a lot of other reasons, including his support for Israel, which is a genocidal state.
All right. Thank you so much, Norman. Lots of other comments and questions we won't be able to get to right away, but there's some support for you to run again, Norman, and there's people really pushing for more civil disobedience. So we will get to more of that on the rest of the program here tonight. Our next speakers, sorry, let me pull up my thing. Alex Marquardt and Kira Kelley. They will be speaking about facing down an empowered police state. Alex is the executive director, the Climate Defense Project, and Kira is a staff attorney at the Climate Defense Project. Alex and Kira, please take it away.
Thanks everybody so much for having us here. My name is Kira, part-time staff attorney at the Climate Defense Project. I do a mix of criminal, civil, and a little immigration law, licensed in Minnesota and New Hampshire and ProHawk in a couple other states, and have been really trying to learn from and support social movements for most of my adult life and more. And I guess to go to that question first, to start off of what should we be doing right now, and to really emphasize that like we're in a power struggle right now, and we are being faced with authoritarian top-down power. And my theory of change is really rooted in collective interpersonal power, and that our power comes from our relationships and our connection to our community and to each other. And if you're wondering what to do, anything that has to do with mutual aid is a great place to start. Food Not Bombs, solidarity work with different marginalized communities, that all of our problems and struggles are really intertwined. And I would say that the scarce resource right now in society and in our movements is radical political analysis. And that I'm using the word radical in the way that Angela Davis uses the word. I would highly encourage folks to look her up if you're not familiar. Radical means getting to the root of the problem. So not addressing just the symptom, but really the root. And we should be encouraging ourselves and our friends and community to be in the most radical sphere of the movement that we're competent in, because our radical political analysis is the scarce resource. So working at a food bank, volunteering there might be a radical move for my like really normie, politically moderate, maybe Republican uncle. But that's not the most radical thing that most of my friends and loved ones could be doing. Maybe you push yourself a little farther outside of that comfort zone and do something like court watch, showing up to watch court proceedings, especially immigration proceedings that really can change the outcome of cases when people are watching. We know that that's really important to do. Maybe it's joining a protest. Maybe it's posting publicly about Palestine when people are being targeted simply for expressing those viewpoints. Whatever it might be, just encouraging ourselves to go as far as we can towards the root of the problem and to be strategic about that. So I agree, signing petitions is like not the most radical thing that we could be doing. And if you've got the capacity to do more than that, then like do more than that, you know? And I would say too, on the note of like people being criminalized for their viewpoints right now, especially around Palestine, and the way that people are being targeted for their political activity and their liberatory activity. Surveillance is one of the greatest strengths of the current regime right now. The partnership between Elon Musk and all of the companies and corporations he represents and the federal government. But relationships are our greatest strength. So this means that we should not try to beat the state at their strongest game, which is to surveil us, like to resist the pressure to hide and to become anonymous, knowing that actually being strategically public about who you are and what you believe, especially if you are somebody like me who has a lot of white privilege, citizenship privilege, any of that, like if we are able to kind of connect with each other openly and to not shrink back or try to distance ourselves from different groups that are being marginalized right now. Repression is not new. Like we're seeing egregious targeting of high-profile activists right now. We're seeing the deportation of people with green cards just because they are pro-Palestine. We're seeing people framed as eco-terrorists and sent to jail, prison for a decade for protesting a pipeline that's going to wipe out entire ecosystems. But this has been happening. The Green Scare was decades ago. Like anti-Muslim racism has been around in this country, like violent xenophobia, the targeting of political movements, especially ones that have to do with anti-racism and decolonization. None of this is new. It's just really egregiously in our face right now. So we've got a lot we can learn from people that have come before us, and just to remember that like if we concede our constitutional rights, limited as they are, then we are just giving this regime an invitation to take more ground from us, and to resist that tendency to divide or to say, oh, I'm a peaceful protester, I'm not dangerous like Antifa. Like that type of throwing each other under the bus is going to really crumble any type of community-based resistance that we might have towards the fascist takeover right now. So I guess, yeah, those are my kind of quick thoughts. Happy to answer questions, but really the encouragement to like find community, do things like mutual aid, to be smart, to be strategic, to study up on people that have been fighting this battle for decades is really the best hope that we have. See if Alex has anything to add.
Thanks, Kira. So I wanted to just give a really, really brief overview of some things that a lot of people are worried about right now, which are lawsuits and government investigations. If you're on the board of an organization such as a 501c3 or C4, it's a good idea to familiarize yourself with your fiduciary duties. These vary by state, but they usually include duties of care, loyalty, and good faith. The rule has been that as long as you adhere to those duties and act within the scope of your role, you as an individual, would not be personally liable for any monetary judgments against the organization as a result of litigation. However, people always recommend directors and officers insurance, regardless, since we're all human. If you're thinking about, actions that are taken outside of an organizational structure, you have a little less protection for that. My understanding, however, is that things like retirement accounts and Social Security are safe from private creditors, although not the government. A lot of people are talking about SLAPP lawsuits right now. You may have seen the big verdict that was in the news yesterday against Greenpeace. So these are lawsuits that are usually brought by wealthy interests that try to silence speech against them. And even if they're not ultimately successful, they often succeed in kind of bankrupting or intimidating the groups that oppose the interest behind them. So these suits involve a few types of claims. Often defamation is a really big one. This includes libel and slander. So libel is a written statement, slander is an oral statement. Business torts like tortious interference and civil conspiracy. These words are a little bit esoteric, but basically it's a good idea to just look up and see if your state has an anti-SLAPP statute, and if so, how strong it is. There is a little bit of assistance through a coalition of groups that have come together specifically for this purpose to protect people against SLAPPs, called the Protect the Protest Coalition, though by no means enough assistance to meet all the demand. Speaking of defamation, since that is such a big component of a lot of these SLAPP suits, there's a good resource from Public Citizen that I'll just drop into the chat. But to summarize some of the main points in that, it's ideal to have your work reviewed by a lawyer prior to publishing something that is critical of what you're opposing. This is called a libel review. Some jurisdictions have laws that allow criminal prosecutions for libels, and others there are only provisions for civil suits. A defamatory statement is a statement that is factual about some entity or individual that, if believed, would harm that person's reputation. And a lot of what these suits turn on is like, what is fact and what is opinion? So the upshot is essentially to just be careful when you're writing something that states an opinion, and make sure that if you do state an opinion, you're also providing the facts upon which that opinion is based. So really quick summary of defamation there. Moving on to government investigations. A lot of folks are worried about their org being investigated. There's talk of profit killer bill. So if you become the target of an investigation, you may receive correspondence from members of Congress or some government agency asking that you produce documents or otherwise respond. This is something that it's good to be prepared for. So it's good to have document retention protocols, internal communication protocols already in place so that you're limiting sort of how much exposure you have in terms of having to respond to these things. You may only have 1 or 2 weeks to respond to these requests for documents. And a lot of the investigations that we've seen in the past, the goal has been to kind of gather information. These members of Congress are really interested, and other groups that are issuing these are interested in mapping networks, seeing who talks to whom. And so there are kind of law enforcement request systems that are maintained by a lot of the big tech providers like Google and Zoom and Slack. And this information routinely gets accessed by law enforcement, who then feed it into data mining software And this is very cheap and easy compared to the old days where you had to have spies and wiretaps and things. And so this is just like, the way it works these days. And the targets don't know that they're being investigated really. So it's just important to be aware of your practices and kind of, to the extent that you can, shift the kind of platforms you're using over to other services that are, less likely to comply with these sorts of requests. And then HR 9495, which I mentioned, the nonprofit killer bill is not law yet. It hasn't been used yet, but people are obviously worried about it. I'm going to drop a link in the chat that is a really good summary of it that I don't have time to give right now, but I'll just drop that link in there. And I think that'll be it for me. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Alex. Make sure you, yeah, there it is. Perfect. And that link is to criminal. Okay, cool. Yeah, we have several questions I want to get to very quickly for both of you. We're running a little bit behind. I was going to ask you, Alex, where can we go to see the services that are safe for internal org communications or for organizers and activists? Is that what that is? Or is there a link, or is there a list somewhere we can go to find some of these safe tools?
I don't have a link to provide with you. So there are certain services that people in our circles use, among them Signal, CryptDrive, Nextcloud are some names that I could throw out there. The Electronic Frontier Foundation might be a good resource to check out if folks want to go to like a well-regarded, org that has a website about this stuff.
Great, thank you. And make sure when we put links, we send them to everyone. I just reposted them though, so everyone should have them now. Thank you, Alex. Kira, what mutual aid group should we look into? And yeah, we'll start with that. What mutual aid group should we be looking into as a way to just kind of, in framing it as not cooperating with Trump as he's shutting things down, where can we go to start working with our communities?
The best mutual aid groups are probably not going to be the national ones that I could point to, but the ones that are local and like small and working in your community. Dean Spade has a really great and very accessible book on mutual aid that's called Mutual Aid. That's by Dean Spade, that lays out some of the important differences between mutual aid, which is more radical and really does address the root problems and has a explicitly political framework, as opposed to charity, which is more Band-Aid solution and kind of like maybe you feel good, but you don't really get to the problem itself. So I would say look local. Your local chapter of Food Not Bombs or Food Not Cops is probably a great place to start if that's in your area. But look around. What's close to you is probably what's best.
Great, thank you. I've worked with some Food Not Bombs group locally, and they're wonderful. Last question for both of you, and then we do have to move on. What's the most radical thing we can do with our privilege? What can we do with our privilege that's really helpful, that anyone on this call can take and apply?
I talk to my parents about this a lot, actually, and I think that like privilege is something that for a lot of us, it's respectability is that privilege. And people will hear things coming from the mouth of a well-to-do, middle-aged, white, person with some standing in society that they won't listen to when it's coming from the people that are suffering that oppression. So I say, being outspoken about the defund the police movement, being outspoken about abolitionism, and being outspoken right now about Palestine, but also there are many other genocides happening right now as a direct result of U.S. imperialism, and to really cut to the heart of that and to talk to people about that. Not to be afraid to lose your respectability by being perceived as too radical. That can be a really radical thing. And that's not unlawful, or at least it shouldn't be, right? We're seeing people criminalized for their speech in those regards, but it should not be unlawful to take the position that our police are harming us when that money could be redirected somewhere else to heal our communities. That shouldn't be a radical position. And the more people that espouse that, the less terrifying it will be for people to hear.
All right. Thank you so much, Alex and Kira. We really appreciate it. We're going to move on to our next speaker in just a minute, India Walton. But real quick, I wanted to give a quick pitch to join the Teach-In Network. We started the Teach-In Network to bring people together, to share knowledge, and to build power in the face of increasing opposition to organizing. Let's see if I can share my screen real quick. Screen. Is that sharing? Do we see that? Good. I'll assume that's a yes. So what is the Teach-In Network? The Teach-In Network is a network of organizers from RootsAction.org and expert speakers, professors and lawyers and subject matter experts from across the country coming together to provide teach-in resources to groups on and off campuses to empower them to challenge militarism and the political establishment. We provide primers, presentations, videos, and all sorts of other things. And of course, access to our expert speakers. Some of them you are meeting here tonight. Some of our speakers are not on this list, but some of them are. So for instance, on this page, this is our toolbox on Gaza, Israel, and the Middle East. Primers, resources, all sorts of videos, social media accounts you can follow just to stay in the loop on organizing. Articles to start conversations, to post on social media, to get people thinking, and then long list of experts on our different subjects. So I strongly encourage you to go to the Teach-In Network. If you want to host a teach-in, if you want your organization to host one, you can go there and sign up. There's also a page you can just say, I need more information. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm not ready to host one, but I'd like to start thinking about it. So strongly encourage you to check that out. And now I'm going to send it over to Alexandria Shaner from ZNet for a quick word about ZNet.
Thanks, Ryan. Hey, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I first just want to second that invitation to check out the Teach-In Network. There's incredible resources there. It's an incredible tool of empowerment. If you thought you could never organize a teach-in or similar event, you definitely can with this resource. So we're at ZNet co-hosting this event tonight. So I'll tell you a little bit about who we are. znetwork.org, or just Z, is a platform to engage with educational content, vision, and strategic analysis that aims to assist activist efforts. We've been around since 1977 and have produced a series of independent media projects that are kind of all connected by this idea of going beyond critique to explore and organize alternatives. We've got an archive of over 70,000 articles and many other resources. And we publish the monthly Z magazine, as well as post new content every single day. And of course, we also partner with groups like RootsAction to host events like we're doing here tonight. And I'll send you our link in the chat.
Thank you so much, Alexandria. Yes, definitely check out Z Network. Excellent place. I go there every day because I help run Progressive Hub. So I'm always looking at articles on ZNet. So thank you for all the work you do, Alexandria. Okay. Now, our next speaker, India Walton. Thank you, India. She'll be speaking about building communities and finding allies. India is the senior strategist at RootsAction. She's a registered nurse and former nominee for mayor of Buffalo, New York, after a stunning Democratic primary victory over 16-year incumbent mayor. India, thank you for being here. Please take the floor.
Thank you for having me, and thank you all for giving up your afternoon, evening, or whatever time it is where you are. I just want to speak a little bit about community, because for people like me and folks who live on the margins of American society, that's been all we've had for a long time. I think that this conversation about being represented by Democrats and resisting Republicans is something that is sort of age old in my community. We've been here before. In fact, I think that what I experienced, as well as what Norman experienced, and what a lot of progressive folks who have run for office experience, is that Democrats would much rather punch left than to have a backbone and stand up against fascism and against the extreme or even moderate right wing. And to Kira's point, I think it is a very important point that we have to make a part of our personal ethos, and that is about mutual aid. And when we think about mutual aid, it is not charity. It's not that you are only volunteering at a soup kitchen. It is that you are seeking out the skills and the value that others have to bring into the community also. So we're talking about barter and exchange. It's like we're not giving handouts, right? It's we have this community garden. Maybe I have the seeds, maybe someone else has soil, maybe someone else can put their shoulder to a plow, and we all work together because folks want to feel like they're a part of something and that they are able to participate. The other thing that I've been thinking about so much lately is that we need folks in positions of privilege to organize yourselves, organize your family, organize your racist uncle, talk about politics at Thanksgiving, talk about trans rights at your dinner table. Like, don't be afraid when it comes to talking to your peers about issues, but then you're asking us who are on the front lines, the ones who are under direct threat and attack, to stand shoulder and shoulder with you at a protest when you haven't addressed your own internal mess or that of the folks that are closest to you or could be influenced by you. So that also is important. Some of the work that's happening here in Buffalo, some of the mutual aid work that's happening, excuse me, is that, and I saw in the chat someone was saying like, well, I'm donating to these groups, and where does this money go to? One of our local organizations, Our City Action Buffalo, currently has raised funding, and we are assisting trans individuals with name changes and passports in case they need to seek asylum in Canada. We a couple of weeks ago hosted a charity basketball game to raise funds in order to support that work, and also to support provide direct support on the ground to families who may have folks who are facing detention, deportation, to make sure that we have enough resources and security for the families who are being left behind. When a person is in detention, a lot of times they're leaving behind a spouse, children, other relatives, and folks who depend on them. And with that income gone and this person in detention, that in and of itself is an issue. But then there's other issues, who is providing childcare, how are they getting food? Many people, and I don't know how it is in other states, but in New York State, our people in detention don't have a legal right to legal representation. So there are children who are in ICE detention, children who are defending themselves against trained lawyers in front of judges because there just isn't enough legal services. So, there's the organizational support, and then there is the deployment of resources on the ground. And again, all of that comes back to relationships, to the organizations you can trust. If you talk to people on the ground, if you speak to impacted people, they will tell you who they are able to trust. They will tell you where your resources should go. They will tell you where your time should go, who you should volunteer with, and what's being impactful and effective. And the last thing that I'll say, because I just can't stop sharing the story, because we talked about, Senator Schumer a bunch in the comments. His staff person called me on Wednesday after the vote, but called me on Wednesday, little old me, who's a nobody, to explain the senator's reasoning for his vote. And I thought a lot about it, and I said, well, why'd you call me, Matt? And he said, well, we're calling around to the progressive influencers because we just want you to know the senator's thinking on this. And that lets me know they hear us, right? They hear us, they see us, they know we're here, they know what we want, they know we're organizing. They're just not listening. So we have to continue to organize around them and lean on and depend on one another in order to survive this nightmare. And again, like the title of this webinar says, like, don't comply, at least not willingly, and love and protect each other.
Thank you, India. You're not a nobody to me, just so you know.
Thanks, Ryan.
You're somebody. You are somebody. That's what Nina says, right? David asked a really good question. There's so many questions. I can't get to all of them, everybody. I'm sorry, but there's a lot of them. Here's a good one. I've been thinking about this as well. How do we build a friendly, growing, popular movement when people are afraid all the time? They're wearing masks. They don't want to be photographed. They don't let anyone in unless it's just a lot of strictness and a lot of insiderness of it all, and plus the fear and the masks and all of that. Trying to keep away from media, demonstrations, avoiding their own media sometimes. So how do we deal with that locally?
I think that we have to pick a side. I think the number one thing is that those of us who are most vulnerable, I don't expect anyone, number one, to do anything that they're uncomfortable with, but there are some of us who are built to be brave, and some of us who are supposed to be out in front and be loud about it. We cannot allow our silence to be consent, because if nobody says anything, if no one does anything, that's how they win. I mean, at the end of the day, the reality is they can't lock us all up, but they're going to lock some of us up. And some of us have to be willing to stand on that and take that risk in order to keep the needle moving.
Is there anything I can do? I'm trying to join a protest and it's more radical elements of it, and they don't want you involved in things. Is that just a sign to stay back? Or how do you pierce the veil and get into these? How do I get into these groups that are really active?
My frustration.
It's a tough question. I know. I'm sorry.
It is, but you know what? When I talk to young organizers, I always make sure to really make a point of saying the protest is not the goal. Unless there is a policy, a piece of legislation, or demand tied to the protest, I'm not coming. I don't want to come outside to just stand there and scream into the void. Who are we screaming at? What are we asking for? A protest is a tactic. And I think that protecting the identity of organizations and people against attack is one thing, but having anonymously organized protests with no follow-up is not helpful, in my opinion. And I think that with tools like Signal and encrypted apps and things like that, there are ways to communicate. And also, this all goes back to relationships. There are some people that I trust, and when they ask me to show up, I'm going to come, and I don't even need a reason to. They don't have to tell me what's going on. If they say, I need you here, then I'm going. And we here in Buffalo have been able to create containers and places of safety where people know that they are welcome and that they are going to be protected. And I think that we have to find a way to take it a step further and expand those spaces and make them welcoming to all. But again, it all goes back to relationships.
All right.
And that takes time.
Yeah, right. So many more questions. I can't get to them. We're running way behind, so I'm going to have to move on. Thank you so much, India, as always.
Always.
Our next speaker, Alexandria Shaner. You heard from her just a couple minutes ago. She's going to be speaking about what to demand from the media. She's a znetwork.org staffer and a writer for Extinction Rebellion, amongst other organizing things. Alexandria, please take it away.
Thank you. So what to demand from the media? First, I'd like to start with briefly clarifying what is propaganda versus what is independent media, and what roles do they fill in society respectively, control versus social infrastructure. Then we can talk about what we want and what we can do about getting it. So what is the media and what do we want it to be? Through ZNet and via my work with grassroots movements like Extinction Rebellion, I consider a free independent media to be part of our social infrastructure. And what do I mean by this? A free and independent media is absolutely essential for ensuring that democracy can exist, let alone that it can be vibrant, transparent, and responsive to the needs of the people. It really provides a foundation for informed communities, checks on governmental and corporate power, and it fosters a dynamic society where all voices can be heard. So without a free independent media, the mechanisms of democracy are weakened and citizens are at the mercy of misinformation and manipulation, which sounds like a sadly familiar situation, yeah? So if media is social infrastructure, what should it actually look like? To put it positively, we can envision and demand a media system that empowers the public, supports democratic engagement, holds power accountable, rather than reinforcing interests of the elites. And I really want to drive home this function of the media in terms of power. Media should be a system of information sharing that serves the people by empowering them to deliberate and make decisions, both as individuals and collectively. But our current mass media, and even much of the so-called alternative media, is instead a system of information sharing that is funded by and serves the powerful. It consolidates their control and facilitates the maintenance of their domination. So another word for this is propaganda. It's important that we start this discussion by clearly making this structural distinction. Now that we've defined the media in terms of what it needs to be for a functioning democracy, a little more on what I mean by propaganda. One example that we'll hear more about later tonight is how it came to be that millions of Americans now passionately believe that immigrants are the main threat to their livelihoods and to their loved ones, while billionaires pose no threat. Even though this is easily disproved by facts, by history, and even by our own daily experiences. So thank you, propaganda. Propaganda refers to these ways in which powerful institutions manipulate information to serve their interests and maintain control over public opinion. And it's operating through our mass media, acting as a mechanism of control rather than a neutral provider of information. And I want to also point out that it's not just about outright lies, but rather about selectively framing information and omitting certain facts, and focusing on particular narratives that maintain the status quo or serve the interests of the powerful. So again, this all sounds really familiar, right? It is not new at all, though I think the public consciousness of this dynamic has become much more prevalent in recent years. All right, so we've defined what we want the media to be, free and independent in the service of a democratic society, as well as define what we have now, which is a propaganda model in the service of elite domination. So let's just take a quick minute before we talk about our demands and what we want to do about it to situate ourselves in this current moment and apply this propaganda model that has long served our capitalist democracy and look at recent changes as we move towards more increased and overt authoritarianism, and consider how this is changing the media landscape. There's two things that I really want to focus on tonight, which is the consolidation of ownership and the increased repression. Consolidation of ownership of the media and the loss of the local press is also absolutely not new, not something that began with this Trump administration. It's been increasing and exponentially so in recent decades. What is new is that this exponential trend in consolidation of control has now reached a point where we're seeing that it is becoming no longer possible to pretend that this consolidation is not a fact. Public consciousness is becoming well aware of the corporate and billionaire control of media, and we're seeing changes in tactics for using the media as a propaganda machine to achieve the same results in terms of control. So the media as a tool of soft power is now being wielded in much less subtle ways. For example, You may have seen that Jeff Bezos recently announced sweeping changes at the Washington Post, which he owns, where the opinion page will now only run op-eds that promote two pillars: personal liberties and free markets. So the paper that once advertised itself with the slogan "Democracy dies in darkness" is now explicitly and openly pro-oligarchy. As a little side note, Amazon, of course, does operate as a monopoly, which means it's antithetical to the free market, though somehow we should expect that that analysis to escape the new writers who are going to be brought in to form opinion at the Post. But really what's new is that the paper's billionaire owner is explicitly dictating the editorial direction. Now, when Bezos says that viewpoints opposing these pillars will be left to be published by others, who does he mean? Where does he mean? The New York Times, Twitter, publishing outlets with the biggest circulation are now all owned by members of the billionaire class. And that's really why independent outlets and journalists are needed now more than ever to provide a counterweight to this oligarch media, to make sure that topics and perspectives that actually serve the empowerment of people are presented and disseminated. Now, alongside this hyper consolidation of ownership, we now also have an accompanying surge in repression. And this is the tactic that is being increasingly relied upon to get the public to go along with the consolidation of the ownership of the media. So basically, if propaganda is no longer cutting it, we're going to use fear as the mechanism of control. I'm just looking at the time. I have a bunch of examples of some recent repression and considerations around free speech, but I'm going to keep that. If you want to hear more, ask in the questions. But basically, I won't subject you to that. You've probably seen it in your feeds. It's been horrific out there. And again, none of this is really new, neither the corporate consolidation of ownership nor the repression. The shift that we need to notice is that as the illusion of an independent or free media is abandoned, there is now a need for more repression and the use of fear as a tactic of control to get us all to go along with it. All right, now I want to talk about opportunities. So yes, we're facing a serious moment of increased corporate and authoritarian control of the media, and of the increased repression that goes hand in hand with it. But this shift is also an opportunity. Anytime there's a major rupture in the status quo, there is space opened up for something new. Whether that will be something good or something bad is where our agency and our action is urgently needed. So what can we do? I'm going to quickly propose a simple stop, think, and act framework that really anyone can tap into. So to start with, stop. Do not participate in or add to the chaos. This 24-hour news cycle and now the nanosecond by second drip feed of content that follows us around via our phones is engineered to keep us stressed out and hyper-vigilant, yet also chronically underinformed, isolated, feeling paralyzed by exhaustion, dread, apathy. So please take control of your daily sensory intake by assessing what it is doing for you and making any necessary changes that you see fit. Second is share responsibly, whether it's unverified scare posts about ICE raids or doom scrolling and posting. I think it's helpful if we resist the urge to engage and share unless it's verified and constructive content. Our current media ecosystem is absolutely engineered to keep you outraged and distracted and to sow chaos. So let's not help them out. They don't need our help. Instead, we can focus on building collective resilience. And I'm so glad to hear my fellow panelists talk about mutual aid tonight. We did not coordinate this, so that just shows you like how powerfully each of us from diverse perspectives are coming to this conclusion. When oppressive systems are used to isolate and exhaust us, carrying this heaviness together is an act of defiance. So this, in terms of media, might mean creating tangible support structures like rotating leadership roles in your community organizations, establishing local mutual aid networks, and building community systems, communication systems that don't rely solely on privately owned social media platforms, and even taking turns monitoring political developments so that everyone has a chance to rest. All right, so that's stop. Now we're going to get to think. Once you're ready to re-engage with the media, you, and by that I mean actually each and every one of us, have what it takes to empower ourselves and each other to engage critically by developing our own critical literacy skills. I'd like to present the concept of critical media literacy, which is really the backbone of our editorial policy at ZNet. So not to imply that you all need to go out and become editors and journalists, but to underline that you, not only can we all engage critically with the media, but that it is our right to do so and our civic responsibility to do so. So critical literacy, really briefly, is the ability to read, analyze, and question the world, particularly through the lens of power and justice. So it's going beyond simply understanding the texts of news and media, and involves recognizing and challenging the social, political, and economic forces that shape the production of knowledge and influence all of our lives, which is empowering us to become active participants in actually transforming our society. In terms of media, it equips us with the tools to think deeply and independently about the media that we consume. It helps us resist manipulation, understand underlying biases, make more informed decisions about the information that we accept, share, and then act upon. So again, these are skills that journalists and editors are supposed to develop, but really these are skills that everyone should recognize and develop. They should be taught in schools, but surprise, surprise, increasingly they are not, precisely because they are so powerful. They are not unlearnable, however, quite the opposite. So continually developing our critical literacy will empower us in all aspects of our lives, and it's something we can all do. And then when you reach out and develop them with friends, coworkers, and families, you're actually creating empowered communities. And this skill is just essential for the functioning of any kind of free independent media, and generally for the health of democratic societies. Now, how actually to apply a critical lens to your media intake, again, due to time constraints, I'm not going to go through a more in-depth guide that I've prepared, but we will publish it on ZNet and make it accessible to you if that's something that you're interested in and want to follow up on. Now, finally, to conclude, number 3, after stop, think, we're going to go to act. How can we develop and support independent media? So the question I was asked to address is, what should we demand of the media that we engage with? And I began this discussion with a summary of how we can envision what a free independent media would look like. And this is exactly what we should demand of any media claiming to represent that. In this moment, a few quick demands that are very, very specifically worth highlighting are, 1, media should be correcting the lies and propaganda. Number 2, it should be actually questioning authority and contesting power rather than engaging in the false divides that the mainstream media presents to us. So, for example, a really common example, the choice between, say, CNN versus Fox News is not a real choice. Both of these outlets are beholden to the billionaire class, and that billionaire class is who we need to resist, unified, not divided. These false divides are designed to polarize and disempower the public, and independent media should not simply accept or repeat the official narratives promoted by governments, powerful individuals, and corporations. Instead, it should critically examine and challenge the actions and policies of those in power, holding them accountable to the public. Independent media should also raise the visibility of resistance efforts that aren't trying to just return to the previous status quo, which, as we've seen, is not the solution, but rather what led us here in the first place. Independent media should bring out perspectives that the mainstream media leaves out. This is a question of who deserves to be heard. We should be platforming climate activists, frontline communities, local journalists on the ground in places like Gaza and Congo, workers, women, generally people affected by decisions, not just the decision makers and influencers. Media should be empowering action. So we shouldn't just be talking about everything that's going wrong. We should be presenting practical ways that people can get involved in resistance, giving the information that people need to make up their own minds and then act upon it. It should be encouraging informed public debate. So providing the public with the tools and knowledge necessary to engage in meaningful political and social debate. And then finally, like super obvious and easy, but incredibly important, independent media should prioritize public interest over profit and be free from corporate and government influence. Full stop. So beyond these demands, when we do find independent media projects that we value,
we gotta if we can wrap up real quick, please.
Oh yeah, sure. Basically, if we do find independent media projects that we value, we need to support them. So I know everyone says this, but you should donate financially or in other material ways. we talked about already, sharing responsibly, and I'll just end with participate. Media is no different from anything we've already talked about. Contribute if you have something to say, send in your words, discuss with your friends, build community, and just really stand up and be vocal in support of those experiencing repression, because fear only works when we give into it. Silence and appeasement have absolutely never worked to stop a bully, let alone dictators. So you don't need to do everything or even the biggest thing. Just start where you are, do what you can in your own ways, and keep making efforts to connect with others as you're doing it.
Thank you, Alexandria. A lot of positive comments in there. Catherine says she could listen to a lot more of you. We have a million versions of the same question for you, Alexandria. I bet you can guess what it is. Where do we go for the good news? If you could, because we have to move on, if you could type a couple out and put it in the chat and make sure you send it to everyone. Some people are even asking specifically about like Substack and people like that. So if you could post some outlets in the chat, that would go a long way. And just separately, you started, it was so funny to me. You started out talking about the news, how they leave things out. They repeat what they want and they omit what they don't want. I believe that's the first chapter of Norman's new book, War Made Invisible, is called Repetition and Omission. So it's like really how they do it is they repeat the stuff they want you to think, and they never say the things they don't want you to think. Pretty simple strategy, really. But yeah, that stuck out to me. Again, reminder, everyone, znetwork.org. Alexandria, please share that link as well, and please check that out. We are going to move on to our next speaker because we are running behind now. So Avi Chomsky, there she is. She'll be speaking about immigrant solidarity, amongst other things. She's a professor and coordinator of Latin American Studies at Salem State University. Avi, thank you so much for being here. Please take the floor.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and thank you for all of these wonderful, inspiring talks we've heard so far. And I think you're going to hear a lot of echoes and trying to build on what we've been hearing. So I'm going to talk about four things. One, narratives, picking up on what Alexandria was talking about in terms of media and how we're taught to think about things. What's actually happening with immigration? What can we do? What's going on that we can plug into? And then returning to narratives. And we definitely hear that immigrants take our jobs and all kinds of lies about immigrants, but I really think that underneath it all is a kind of a bigger narrative that connects the discussion about immigration to also discussions about foreign policy, and in particular right now to everything that's happening in Gaza. And this is what I would call the colonial narrative, that colonized people are dangerous, they're barbarian hordes, and that these embattled bastions of civilization like the Trumpian United States, MAGA, Israel, the old white South Africa, are the only holdouts, and maybe the European countries too think of themselves this way, against these barbarian hordes who are constantly engaging in violence and endangering the lives of these embattled white colonizers wherever they are. And I really think that immigration is an area where foreign and domestic policy meet. And in some ways we see this particularly in the case of Mahmoud Khalil, who challenges the colonizers' narrative both on the foreign policy level and on the immigrant level. But this construction of immigrants as these dangerous hordes, and President Trump is constantly using the term invasion, and we're hearing, criminal immigrants are violent, and that narrative even goes beyond the media. It is so pervasive from the moment we are born in this country. It's in all of the movies that we see. It's in the curriculums we have in school. It's just everywhere. It's the air we breathe. So being conscious of that. So much of what has happened so far has gone through executive orders that Trump has implemented. And I could not possibly list them all for you, even if I had an hour, because there are so many and they're just following one on the other. But basically, each one of these, our immigration system deprives people of rights. That is, our immigration system is a system of legal status that deprives humans of legal status and puts them into different categories where they have different rights. So what all of the executive orders are trying to do, and of course, foreigners have fewest rights of all, especially if they're Gazans. What all of these executive orders are trying to do is to push more people into rightlessness, to allow completely lawless enforcement of laws on them where they have no defense, where they have no freedom of speech, where they have basically no rights. They have no ending birthright citizenship, ending temporary protective status, ending refugee programs, turning every immigrant into a criminal, mobilizing the military, putting people in chains, just this denial of rights on every level. And I'm happy to talk about any of the executive orders in more detail, but that just sort of summarizes them. I wanted to spend most of my time here talking about how we fight back, and that I really feel that this is a moment of all hands on deck, so that there's no one right way to fight back, that as several speakers have said, we're all in different places. We have different capacities. We all need to be fighting back in different ways. But let me just mention some of those ways. One is that everywhere that there are immigrants, there are immigrant rights organizations. And some of those are very local organizations. Some of them are part of national networks, national organizations like the National Network for Immigrant and Refugee Rights, the American Friends Service Committee. So there organizations are doing existing organizations are doing on the local level. A lot of what we're seeing happening in terms of resistance right now is coming not only from these organizations, but also from legal organizations. That is, the executive orders are not exactly laws. They're trying to mobilize different parts of the legal system, but legal challenges to the executive orders and to the policies that are being implemented. The legal pushback is coming in on two levels. Not all of us are lawyers. Not all of us are connected to legal organizations that are doing these things. But one is the support for detained individuals, and the other is trying to stop some of these laws in their tracks. In a lot of ways, this legal struggle is very important, but it's also very ineffective because, as we are seeing, first of all, it's a very slow process. And secondly, the administration is basically steamrolling over legal challenges. So this is bringing us to perhaps a constitutional crisis. I also wanted to talk about mutual aid support because immigrants who are being pushed into rightlessness, their vulnerability and their needs are growing day by day. So immersing yourself in immigrant communities. What is it that people need? Someone mentioned support for families when someone is detained. Who's going to take care of the children? Who's going to feed the children? When somebody can't go to work, when the one worker in the family loses their job, when people are afraid to go to school. So these organizing at the mutual aid level, and there's immigrant rights organizations in every community in the country that is trying to organize that. So plugging into that. Direct action, that is, again, all over the country, organizations are trying to plan for rapid response networks, for trying to actually have people who are able to put themselves on the street in front of ICE trucks, engage in civil disobedience, to try to really physically stop what is happening. Obviously, you have to be really well organized for this. It's not something you can just go out and try to do, but there are trainings going on. You can find ways to get involved in this if this is something that you are willing and able to do. Of course, protesting, and I agree absolutely with what India said, that a protest is meaningless unless it has an ask. A protest has to have a goal, but protesting in the streets and bringing the system to a halt. That is, if we actually had enough support, we could bring the system to a halt. And this brings me back to my final thing that I want to mention, which goes back to the narratives question, which is education. That is, we are not strong enough We can do all of these things, and we need to do all of these things, but we are not strong enough. Much of the country either supports what the president is doing or is just apathetic about what the president is doing, or I should say the administration is doing. So I really think that education and critical literacy, as Alexandria was saying, but going beyond even just the media and really delving into these narratives and educational activities. Of course, I'm a professor, so that's easy for me to say, but I do think that finding ways of changing the narrative at these fundamental levels, that is, we are not going to succeed unless we can grow substantially. And these narratives can change. But that's a big task for us. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Avi. Scrolling through questions. Okay, I have to get this one to make sense. You talk about people being apathetic. From your experience on the ground working with immigrant communities, what changes the narrative the most for people who are apathetic? Humanizing the immigrants, what can you say about these immigrant communities, about individual human beings, that takes someone from apathetic about these things to caring? Right now, I mean, I'm in Indiana. I mean, my friends, they don't even know about most of the deportations unless I bring it up and have to tell them about it. So how do we take someone from apathetic to being on our side on this?
Well, I have to also say that support for President Trump is not restricted to non-immigrant communities. There is also support for the administration in immigrant communities, so we can't make them monolithic. And apathy is also present in immigrant communities, although I think fear is growing in immigrant communities as it's growing in many places. Again, I don't think there is only one way. You can approach it from the perspective of critical literacy. You can approach it from the perspective of unveiling colonial narratives. I teach a whole class on colonialism where it's like that get to help students see what is a colonial narrative is one of my main goals in the class. Hearing individual stories, meeting people is also part of it, but there's no panacea. There's no one way. And again, to me, it's more like right now we're at all hands on deck. We have to just try everything.
Gotcha. Thank you so much. Lots of questions about, are you related to the great Noam Chomsky? Of course. I'm trying to see if there's any other questions on immigration specifically. I'm not seeing anything else right now. In your local community, do you think your local community is representative of what's going on in the rest of the country? Or do you think that it's kind of a city by city thing where it's different? You have sanctuary cities. Do you think the experience for immigrants is different based on where you are geographically and the help that's available?
Yes, well, I'm in a very blue state where Massachusetts Democrats are generally not the most progressive Democrats, but on the issue of immigration, there's been a fairly strong progressive tendency, I would say, among the Massachusetts Democrats. We are also a sanctuary state. There are many sanctuary cities, and of course, that means many different things. There's no one strict definition, but on the other hand, cities that have identified themselves as sanctuary cities, and in particular, cities and states where local regulation, whether at the state level or at the city level, prohibits or discourages law enforcement agencies from enforcing federal immigration law, are specifically being targeted by the Trump administration now. And, that started on day one when he said, we're going after Chicago because Chicago is a sanctuary city and we're going to show them that we can't do it, that they can't do it. So again, there is going to be backlash to anything that we do. And that's why I feel like such a big piece of this is that we have to be stronger.
Gotcha. Thank you so much, Avi. Oh, I guess I have to follow up on that. What is stronger? Quickly, how can we be stronger?
Well, education. We have to reach beyond our bubbles.
Right.
More
So we gotta
teachers.
start talking to other people, reaching into other communities and getting people on our side. Yeah, I think that's right. Thank you so much, Avi. I appreciate your time. We're going to move on to our next speaker. Simone Chun, thank you so much for your patience. We're running a little bit behind. Simone's going to be speaking about how South Koreans defeated or are continuing to defeat a coup non-violently. She is a researcher and activist focusing on inter-Korean relations. She's on the Korea Policy Institute Board of Directors and the Advisory Board for CODEPINK. Simone, thank you for being here, and please take it away. Oh, you're muted. Oh, still muted. There we go.
Okay, so I do have a PowerPoint slide that I want to share. Seems to be not working, so I will just a little bit. Oh, there you go. Let's see, this one, share. Is my slide shared?
Yep, we got it.
Let me see. I can find the slideshow mode.
Yep. We see your whole desktop. Oh, there we go.
Okay, so as you know, so this is a story about happening right now. It is the title of my talk is Yoon Suk-yeol's Rogue Insurrectionism, and as you know, on December 3rd, 2024, South Korea's President Yoon Suk-yeol, his far-right President Yoon Suk-yeol, launched a failed coup against his own government. It was obviously an assault on South Korea's democracy. But what happened on that day was not just an isolated event. It was the culmination of escalating militarism and Koreans' vigorous people's resistance, and also far-right extremism. And so, moreover, this crisis is being emboldened by Yoon's deep alignment with Washington's far-right coalition. So what I want to do is, because I had a lot of analysis about the geopolitical context, but for the theme of our discussion, I'll focus on the movement side, how Koreans have successfully stopped the martial law and the illegal insurrection. The answer is the light revolution, what is referred to as a light revolution. So how South Koreans stopped Yoon Suk-yeol's attempted coup. So as you recall, about December 14th, which is about 10 days later, about 2 million South Koreans, they're bearing sticks and candles and the beacon. They all formed a luminous sea around the National Assembly to demand the impeachment of Yoon Suk-yeol, who led the illegal martial law. And so it was successfully impeached. And however, at this point, you might have heard from the news that after more than 100 days of impeachment, and still the South Korean, we're waiting for the final stage where the Constitutional Court will, do ruling on the National Assembly's impeachment. So that's where we're waiting for. And most likely, it is expected that by next week, the ruling will come, and we'll see whether Yoon Suk-yeol will be removed from office. So that's where we're now. But nevertheless, this is, so in other words, this is not, we don't have a complete victory yet. We are in a waiting right now. So, but this is in a way, a revolution that is taking place with a lot of twists and turns. And really millions of Koreans, including myself, we haven't been able to really. We have an incredible amount of stress, and as part of this ongoing crisis. I think earlier, Professor Chomsky raised this question about, how do we fight back? I thought about maybe I will kind of organize my talk around that question. So, how did the Koreans fight back? I would call this is creating almost permanent, standing, peaceful army, democratic resistance, ranging from 1 million to 2 million. So what I call this particular one, and when we impeached Park Geun-hye last time, it was called the Candlelight Revolution, again symbolizing the peaceful revolution. This time we call the Revolution of Light. What is it? It is a broad-based coalition, labor unions. As you may remember, Korean Confederation of Trade Union, that is one of the largest trade unions, who provides the organizational and also resources, disciplined movement. So, we talked about here earlier about, mutual aid and all different kinds of way of organizing. So what I thought maybe what I can contribute to our discussion from Korea's experience is the importance of trade union, the importance of organized labor, workers, and also in Korea expanding now not only the traditional organized unions, but also not the union of irregular workers, part-timers. And there's a farmers, students, this linking to this now growing, this is a powerful youth movement. Many of them, the number one concern right now is, the unemployment. We have just a massive, really pandemic crisis of youth unemployment. And there's a women's rights group. What you might heard about this new latest Korea's Democracy 2.0 is this incredible mobilization of women, especially young women. We're talking about actually from middle school, high school, and college women in the 20s and 30s. So the women's rights groups, and also of course the opposition lawmakers who actually contribute to the impeachment of, and more importantly, overseas Koreans, including myself, who joined in solidarity, and moreover, Americans. Korea has such a, and one thing that I feel really amazing about being America is that having gotten to know incredible American peace activists who have been fighting who have been showing solidarity for Korea's peace and democracy for decades. So all those made the broad-based coalition, the Revolution of Light. So I want to say, despite some setback, we were able to rescind illegal martial law. We were able to impeach law. And at this point, the Constitutional Court is now tasked with confirming the impeachment and made a fierce demand for democratic accountability and national sovereignty. Now, I earlier talked about creating almost permanent people's standing army, democratic, peaceful standing army. Now, 1 million. This was just last weekend, right? Because we're still waiting for the impeachment, the court's decision, right? 1 million. These are not ad hoc groups of people. These are organized. Some of them are spontaneous. And so what I want to do is to show, because we talk about how do we organize? How do you organize? So what I want to show is really the faces, the images. Who are they? What was the demand? This one you can see. You will see a lot of flags. So what you can see that it's not really. Usually you see the patriotic Korean flag. It's not that. A little bit different. 21st century movement. Organization will bring all their flags, different flag, and then there is some of the flags will look like about women's groups, and then animal rights group, right? So you can only see that. You can really see that this very diverse interests that working together. Now, and I have actually included this slide because I also have been working very closely with the Professor Chomsky, giving this kind of context. Not only Koreans are fighting against this, in this particular case, the illegal coup, but also what it is, the Koreans right now, the context, geopolitical context that shaped this, created this incredible assault on democracy, which is what basically the Korea has been under more than 70 years. We are in a state of war. Korean War have never ended. We're still, working toward to get a peace treaty. And you can only see right now, moreover, on the Biden administration, Korea has been literally, this is as Professor Chomsky did, a webinar we organized, is that Korean Peninsula is right now, is basically in the midst of US Trump to war and etc. So in that context, that because of this context, it is so more important that how Koreans have been able to mobilize so peacefully. And along with that is, of course, this constant threat, 250 days per year, U.S.-led war drills. Right? Imagine now in the United States you have 28,500 foreign troops occupying next to White House, and then you have 250. They do 250 days of war game. How can you have democracy? Now, that being said, though, on the night of martial law, you will see all people did all so looking at the as I earlier pointed out, that the broad base of this coalition. This was looking at the Korean Confederation Trade Union. They try to appeal now more to the young people, right? And try to expand their traditional base. This is looking at just as I pointed out, the 1 million Koreans just last weekend. Right? They have not stopped despite all this onslaught from the far-right coalition, violent coalition. They have still managed to have disciplined organization and inspiring mobilization. Again, I want to show you this. Those who know Korean, this one says, red is the color of revolution. And there's somewhere it says this is for persons, something about cats, people who love cats. And then there's unions. There's all these different regions from all works of Korea. So they all come together. In other words, it also shows how the plural, right, diversity of issues, and they all coming together to demand justice and to defend the democracy. Again, more images as you can see. As you hear, I want to show that again, going back to the importance of the alliance of citizens and non-governmental organization, grassroots, also the very powerful trade union. This one is electronic workers organization, service workers organization. And what is it? What are we going? So this is the 우리가 만날 다시 만난 세계. This is the famous K-pop song. This is basically so all together we're gonna go to a new world together. Right? We're gonna go. First, we're going to actually arrest Yoon, and also we're going to disband the ruling far-right party, right? So we're all going to go together into the new world. And continuing some of those. And this one was, as you can see, it's as hard as so depressing. It's so just it's almost like psychological torture, Koreans on torture. But nevertheless, there is because this movement is going to be, it's going to be long, right? This is not going to be just temporary thing. So there is some sort of, you still have to find to have, to experience joy, laughter, etc. This is a way to all-night camping and snow where to arrest Yoon, right? So we actually did arrest Yoon. And moreover, overseas Koreans like me, right? So here's Seattle, South Korean President Yoon out, Seattle rally. And we're also contesting this far-right, this Republican member of Congress from California, who is saying that those whose Koreans are pursuing impeachment, they are subordinate. They're puppet of subordinate to China's Communist Party. So Koreans have protested against her. We visited her office, and we're saying, stop disrespecting Koreans. And her name is, I hope maybe you guys can also pay attention to what she's doing in the Congress, Young Kim. And there's Chicago, New York, Boston, Germany, again Germany, Japan, Sydney, Australia, and France, Paris. So this is all these all voluntary. Nobody, there's no order from the top. And I thought this poster is perfect. This is from people, Korean Americans living in Ireland. It said, impeach Yoon. We do not want a dictator, period. He must go. So that has been our demand. That being said, as I earlier pointed out, we are still waiting. Constitutional Court, those justices who are not elected, who are appointed, are taking, for some reason, very long time to deliver when the case is so clear cut, right? So they're, again, camping all night. These people doing hunger strike. Just it was last weekend, hunger strike. These are the Korean artists who've been blacklisted. Right? They're doing hunger strike in front of, right? This is the Korean Artists Association, right? Hunger strike. So in order to wrap up a little bit, so I want to show this the faces of people who are actually mobilizing and actually organizing and protesting. So what is it? What is the big picture? This is about. It's not just about Yoon's personal act. This was about Yoon, who has been promoted by Biden, by Washington for the last 3 years. He was considered the Washington's perfect partner. It's called in Korea, known as the Biden's man. He was champion of democracy. And he was even, Kurt Campbell even said he should be nominated for Nobel Peace Prize. And there we have, what did he did this coup? It was a month-long, thorough preparation. There's a shocking level of brutality, repression on a massive scale, and enabled right now sustaining by transnational US-South Korea far-right coalition. And was Yoon's idea just his own? No, it is perfectly aligned with the Washington's Indo-Pacific propaganda. In fact, he just borrowed from Washington's McCarthy era playbook, basically saying, whoever disagree with me, they are pro-communist. They are anti-state forces. He weaponizing Cold War paranoia for personal and political gain. And all those talk about Washington's 70-year ironclad commitment. If you look at the other way to look at it, this is what they call it is iron-fisted dominance of Korean politics and independence by Washington. And so this is, so in other words, I think when you look at the case of countries, like Korea that has been under US domination, you cannot explain only the country's domestic endogenous variable. What it leads to also is that we really need Americans' alliance, solidarity. Now, although I said that we had this great democratic revolution still ongoing, but still there are very concrete obstacles. Those are structural forces of militaries. As long as US is planning for war against China in Northeast Asia, there's not going to be, its democracy is very difficult to maintain. And there's also right now, what this new phenomena is that Yoon really emboldening far-right groups, transnational South Korea, US far-right coalition, heavily funded, massively funded. And so this is something that a little bit we have to really pay attention to. So the bottom line with the call to action, reclaiming democracy and sovereignty, and US-led war games in the Korean Peninsula. 255 days of war game must end. Challenge US-led anti-China. This is global geopolitical issue. Anti-China, anti-North Korean provocation. Advocate peaceful coexistence with North Korea. Confront far-right extremism and political violence, which we have right now here in the United States, and Korea is going to have it, and support South Korea's pro-democracy movement, and oppose US-backed militarism, far-right and authoritarian alliances. So therefore, I really at this, a crucial moment, I really plead that Americans, please, stay with us. Please please help us to keep our courage and also your courage against democratic forces, not only in Korea, but also in the United States, but all over the world. And I want to end a couple of images. I think the Koreans, something very unique about Korean movement, mobilization is that we have this is generational activism. It's persistent. And also against enormous amount of force. So here's this picture of a grandma who's basically, she's protesting against the US deployment of THAAD in this tiny, small rural village. So I just wanted to share this image to show the resilience, the persistence of Koreans' resistance to create, not only the ultimate goal is to create hope and courage, not just, seize power, that's it, and move on. And here this is I thought this is the artist version of a Korean. This is a young girl who is staying all night, young women protesting, to defend the constitution, democracy. And the Korean word says, imagining a new Republic of Korea. And my final thought, because the theme is nonviolence. Well, Martin Luther King Jr., this is the Maya Lin, Chinese-American artist who was the designer of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Law. So this is her designing of a civil rights memorial law. She says here, until justice, quoting Martin Luther King Jr., until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. And I think today, right now, I'm not in the most optimistic moment, still waiting. Who knows, next week, Yoon may come back. But even if the worst thing happened, we're not going to stop. We're never going to give up because as Martin Luther King Jr. said, we have to have a faith in it, right? Justice will roll down like water, and then someday we're going to create this mighty stream that's going to help us inspire and whatever. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Simone. We have so many questions. That was amazing. First off, the photo, so inspiring. All those tents, it reminds me of Occupy, where I really got my start with activism. So thank you for sharing those photos. That was amazing. And then the MLK quote at the end, Norman, it will be quick to remind us of, he talks about the madness of militarism and the demonic suction tube of militarism that takes good from communities and sends it away for war and death. I got lots of questions for you. People do. Let's start with the light revolution. And if anyone has to go, feel free. We're going to try to do some questions now, but we're way over time. So if anyone has to go, please feel free. I guess quickly, whose idea was the light revolution? Everyone showing up with lights. Was it their own? Did everyone bring their own? Did a group organize it? When Occupy started, it started with an advertisement that just had a date and it said, bring a tent. Did they say bring a light? What happened? How'd that happen?
Those were actually, I think it just started, and Korea just, it's still very homogeneous, a small country. Quickly things can become very, popular. And actually this one was the young people, especially BTS fan, that's how they started. And then, and this, before we used the candlelight, but this time we brought this kind of light stick because it's easier and also long lasting. And so there's no kind of, it's like a movement. It became a, very popular thing. So there's no, any, it didn't say, the opposition party said, okay, everyone bring their light stick. No, that didn't happen. Yeah.
That's amazing. So the maybe older adult organizers and organizations kind of let the youth lead, and they said, okay,
yeah,
that's awesome.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That's so cool. Could the resistance have succeeded or continue to succeed since it's not over yet?
Mhm.
Could it have gotten to where it is now without the labor federations?
My answer will be, I want to say no, for two reasons. One was that, the last impeachment during Candlelight Revolution, there was also, it was very powerful because of the labor unions' involvement. And Korean labor union, there are two labor union, trade union. One is more sort of conservative. The other is more progressive, Korean Confederation of Trade Union. The labor union itself, it grew out of the against the dictator. So it has this historic, that's the roots of, protesting against dictator and fighting for democracy. And there's so many people, workers, who literally, who died, self-molested, died of, doing hunger strike and all kinds of sacrifice. So I would say my answer will be no. And more importantly, next week, the Korean Confederate Trade Unions are saying that they're going to go on general strike if the Constitutional Court does not come up with the ruling by March 27th. So there's going to be a general strike, nationwide strike, no cooperation. So we have waited, enough. So that's so. So what the labor union does is that they, again, as I pointed out, they provide. They have a history. They have a discipline, and actually, I wrote a dissertation about actually the rise of a new left party in Korea, and so I had extensive interviews with the trade unions. But it's really excellently important, especially in this the neoliberal assault on workers. It is so important that unions get involved, especially finding that solidarity between unions and grassroots other civic organizations.
Sure. Two quick questions. Well, they're not going to be quick. They're just two questions. You talked about Yoon attempting to, or he's provoking conflict with North Korea to justify martial law, right?
Yes.
That sounds a lot like Netanyahu continuing the war to gain domestic support so he doesn't get tossed out. It also sounds a lot like Trump arresting Mahmoud Khalil and some of these other people who have been arrested and using, they're supporting the enemy. I guess, how do you see us resisting that in the US? How did you guys resist that? Or not you, you're in the United States, but how did Koreans resist that there?
You know what? I think that our case, literally, I gotta tell you, I think there was who raised the question, should we start impeachment? Actually, we have the Candlelight Revolution visual. Actually, it's happening every week, the weekly Candlelight National. Sometimes it can be only maybe 2,000 people, or so it varies. But started even day one of Yoon's inauguration. Even then, right? We didn't think of, he will be impeached. But so now what is important is that no matter what happened, you have this, you create this what I call the routine, and also so that the movement never dies. So in that sense, I guess the start right now, even contesting Trump or any other dictator, you have to start right now. You cannot start the opportune moment, and you cannot start until maybe next congressional election. No, you have to start even literally tomorrow.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I got one. I'm going to try to do one last question. I know we're so over time, everybody. I'm so sorry. It sounded like you said the U.S. played a role in, how am I going to do this? Yoon was supported largely by U.S. militarism, and that is the right wing and the Democrat, right? So you have this support for U.S. militarism that leads to him calling martial law, and ultimately the people really standing up to them. Did that leave a bad taste in South Koreans' mouths towards the United States, or are South Koreans inspired by U.S. protesters? How did that relationship change between South Koreans and how they feel about America? Were we inspiring to them to say, hey, go out there and protest? Or were they like, why did these Americans cause this? I guess that's what I'm trying to get to.
I think if you look at the media report, you will not definitely look at Americans, still Koreans. If you look at polls, 7% Koreans, support U.S. Korea alliance, and Koreans have a positive, view of America, etc., etc. But at the same time, if you look at the other poll, also 70% of Koreans against the Yoon's foreign policy that completely, he subordinated to U.S. geopolitical interest. And 70% of Koreans want rapprochement with North Korea, do not want war. They want a peace treaty. They want Trump administration to have diplomacy, have normalization with the North Korea, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So in a way, I guess that they are Koreans. We have lived long enough under this condition. Koreans are somewhat practical. If you only look at the rhetoric, you may not be able to get a good, correct analysis. So they are, in a way, at this particular moment, most Koreans are still more focusing on Yoon's more personal wrongdoings and illegality. They're not necessarily, but the point that I'm making is, as a scholar and as activist and as critical analyst of geopolitics, what I'm saying is it is important to look at the broad geopolitical context, which led to this monstrous outcome. And we have to, without changing America's foreign policy, no matter how millions of Koreans protest, we're still going to be basically still continuing obstacle. That's why we need Koreans and Korean Americans, and we all have to find, we have to cultivate our solidarity more than ever, global alliance.
Excellent. Simone, thank you so much. I kept you for too long, and I'm sorry. That was a really wonderful presentation, a great conversation. Thank you so much. I want to send it over to Alexandria real quick. If you want to say another quick word on ZNet, and then we'll say goodnight to everyone. We still have almost 140 people on the call, so people have really enjoyed this. Alexandria, go ahead.
Thank you. And also thank you to Simone. That was really incredible. I also really enjoyed seeing the images. That was cool, inspiring. I know that there were a lot of questions in the chat about, well, where can people find this trustworthy and valuable independent media? And that's a little bit of the reason that znetwork.org exists. So I'll talk about that. We post original content every day. However, we also scour the internet. We have a list of our regular sources, and we're constantly looking for new sources of independent media outlets, individual journalists, whether they're on Substack or other platforms. And we repost content, sometimes also stuff from Progressive Hub, of course. So that can be a really good way to start looking out for what outlets, in addition to just ZNet, that you might like. Some are more newsy, some are more based on long-term analysis, long-form content. Some are more video, but just check ZNet, and when you find articles that you like, check the source. And if it's a source that you see repeatedly that you like, maybe add that to your feed. Maybe consider supporting us, supporting them. The billionaire class is funding their media, and independent media, in order for it to exist and be accountable to us and serve our interests, we got to support it as well. So I'll just leave it with that.
Thank you so much, Alexandria. Usually we stay for more questions, but we're about 30 minutes past time already. So with that, I want to say thank you, Simone, Alexandria, Avi, India, Alex, Kira, Norman, everyone else who is here, the over 300 people who came and watched this call today, and to the 150, we're losing them now, to everyone else who's still here. Thank you, everybody. Have a great evening, and free Palestine, carry on, and keep the fight going. Thank you all.